very warm welcome to Insight. I'm Amandra Bhatt. Today we talk about the ongoing US government shutdown even as President Barack Obama and congressional Republicans failed to end a standoff that has forced. And to discuss the same, we have with us in our studios three distinguished guests. Please welcome Mr. A.N. Ram, who's a former secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. Welcome to Insight, Mr. Ram. Sitting next to him is Ninad Sheth, who's a senior journalist. Welcome to Insight, Mr. Sheth. And we are also joined by Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, who's a dean with the Jindal School of International Affairs. Professor Chaulia, what exactly is a shutdown for the benefit of our viewers? How does it happen, and why did this one happen? Of course, we know it happened because of the differences over the Obamacare bill.
Well, it's just the normal system where the legislature approves a budget for which the executive, through which the executive can carry out its functions. The legislature, or part of it, the House of Representatives, one of the two chambers, which is ruled by the opposition Republican Party, dominated by them, is holding it back. So the state has, very less of savings to be able to perform many of its functions. It depends on, appropriations from the Congress. So that's been held back. And then 17th of October, we are approaching also the what they call the potential debt default. It's more serious,
right.
By which it means that America will not be able to pay interest on the bonds which people buy around the world, governments and private sector. So what's basically happening is that the part of the Congress is saying that we will in a way limit the government's functions until you listen to us and repeal or defund, as they call it, the healthcare legislation, which is a signature one for President Obama. So he is not in a position to compromise on his landmark achievement for which he is going to be remembered for posterity. And then second, on the other side, the reason these hardline Republicans are refusing to accept is because they've done a lot of redistricting and gerrymandering of the constituencies. So they are sure of holding on to the House despite their brinkmanship and despite this reckless behavior. So they are not afraid of being punished by voters. So that's the reason neither side is giving way at all. Both of them think that they are, the other side is making an error. So it's like that in game theory, we have the game of chicken, where both are racing towards each other, and each assumes that the other will swerve, and that I need not blink. So it's that kind of situation, eyeball to eyeball. A divided government America has been having, as it divided meaning the presidency is in one party's hand and one or more of the chambers in another party's hands. But it's become really, really nasty this time because of the perception that Obama is somehow some kind of cryptic socialist, or that he has this big government agenda. So that's been I think the reason why this time it's become so the polarization is very, very extreme.
But as Mr. Ram said, would you agree that perhaps we are overstating it, or we must be careful not to overstate its impact?
Yeah, well, even with, for example, the overseas commitments that have been stalled, it's clear that if you look at the material deployments in East Asia, for example, Obama has not turned up at a summit, at the APEC summit, but that's one thing, that's a symbolic miss. But then when it comes to their commitment to shift 60% of their naval forces to the Asia Pacific, they are still on track with that. Right, so the things that go on behind the appearances of leaders, so as in like the real diplomacy, the real material deployment, the real projection of power, Americans still have some cards, and I don't think we can say that the Chinese have stolen a limelight and so on.
I was going to come
because
to
of this. So, but nonetheless, the absence of leaders and their no-show is a slap on the face of a country which depends upon personalities and projecting personalities of presidents globally as leaders, right? So there is a leadership vacuum, and clearly Obama's disappearance from the big global multilateral summits does convey a message that perhaps America is like weak, perhaps it's a banana republic, perhaps it's not going to really emerge out of this internal turmoil to be able to really grapple the global challenges. So there's a disconnect between the domestic political will seems to be missing, right? And sometimes political will also matters. It's not just the material capabilities.
Right, but as you said, the Asia pivot seems to be firmly intact.
I think so. I mean, see, in terms of the real problem is the diversion towards the Middle East and the crisis there. It's not so much the budget shutdown. And the priority they've given to the military and to keep the military's funding and the soldiers' pays going. Implies that they'll continue to do their force projections in East Asia as per plan. although the Middle East can be, a diversion. So the real challenge for the pivot is less the shutdown and the budgetary constraints, at least for the moment, than the crisis in Syria and Egypt and so on, which can be a diversion.
Professor Chaulia, I think one of all the consequences that might follow this shutdown getting prolonged, I think the worst could be to the kind of damage it does to America's reputation in the world.
Yeah, perhaps, especially because the economic recovery is very faint, and the timing of this shutdown, and in fact there have been a series of blows to this credibility, like start with the so-called fiscal cliff, then we went to the sequester, and now it is shutdown, then possibly default. It looks like the timeline of the US's attempts to recover from the economic crisis is dotted with these periodic, political paralysis, and therefore I think it does convey a message that they are not able to just get their act together. I mean, Secretary of State Kerry has said that this is just a moment of political silliness and it's going to pass. But it's one of those moments along a timeline that I've just mentioned, which conveys a message that America doesn't have the political capital and the will to be able to sustain itself as this megalith. And because sometimes it's not just about, as I said before, the material power, the GDP or the military. It's also about your ability to deploy your diplomacy efficaciously with the kind of vigor that America is known for. And that seems to be missing in many theaters of the world. If you just do a kind of a geographical count, many parts of the world America seems to be missing or not part of the solution, or hand-wringing, right? So this adds to the impression that it just is not unified enough domestically to be able to have that self-confidence and the swagger for which it is known across the world. And the GDP every week of the shutdown brings down the next quarter GDP forecasts. So actually the recovery, if it's stunted, and if it comes down to below 2% again this year, it just means that it's going to prolong the misery for American people also. And there's a link between the sovereign debt and the corporate debt. So if the US government defaults or comes close to it, what it's going to do is it's going to send jitters in the markets, and therefore Goldman Sachs and all these big Wall Street firms are also coming out opposing this stalemate and saying that let's resolve it fast. Because for all of them, Uncle Sam must be solvent. And if Uncle Sam is defaulting or getting close to that, there could be capital flight from the United States. There could be, the yields, as it's called, on the bonds, on sovereign bonds, can go up significantly. The borrowing costs of the government can go up, and that in turn will affect the private borrowings. So the entire dynamism of the economy, which anyway was not doing so well, is in question with these repeated, episodes starting from the so-called fiscal cliff until now.
Already we are hearing that how leaders of other countries like China and Japan took center stage in the absence of President Obama. Professor Chaulia.
Yeah, if you see the Trans-Pacific Partnership, of course, whether Obama was present or not, anyway, it was not going to be signed right away. Negotiations are still ongoing. It's a very complex multilateral preferential trade agreement, and there are concerns on both sides about market access and about harm to domestic industries and so on. So they are still, I think, hoping to sign it by the end of this year. But maybe now, because of this problem the Americans are facing, it may be delayed, because the TPP was an American idea, and the idea was to bring together Pacific Rim countries and to demonstrate and reinforce that America is what they call a resident Pacific power. For that to happen, it has to have a trade and economic aspect as well as a military one. So apart from the cancellation of summits, the Philippines has been very disappointed that a state visit has been cancelled. So there are like lots of things where and then at the end of the day, foreign policy is also about show. It's about pomp. It's about display. It's about walking together and showing the right kind of body language. There is what Dominic Moises called the geopolitics of emotion, right? In the absence of Obama, walking around, for example, with the Philippine leader, there is, if you see the discourse within countries, within Indonesia, within Malaysia, within Philippines, government as well as media and public opinion is dismayed because they believe that, unless America follows through on its commitments, both in terms of security assistance, economic integration of the Pacific Rim countries, as well as showing up on these important events, all these matter insofar as it gives spine to some of these countries that have been struggling against the giant in their neighborhood, which is China. So to that extent, I think there is an impact, a negative one, on the United States. So at the end of the day, it's about commitment. Is America able to execute? And lurking beneath this is the fear that in the long run, as a deficit hawks become more and more powerful and vocal within the American establishment and retrench and cut, is there going to be a time when actually the security alliances and the patterns that the United States has in East Asia, are they going to be somehow diluted? So that's the lurking fear. It's still a fear. As I said before, they are still maintaining the force levels and power projection. But if that happens, I mean, this could be a slippery slope. If this becomes a pattern, as I said, since 2011, they have been having these periodic crises of divided government.
Right.
And then, what's next? Should we even believe them? Or maybe the better alternative is to tag along with the Chinese and to maybe agree to some kind of superordinate, subordinate binary with the Chinese.
Right.
It's probably makes more sense because anyway, East Asian nations are integrated economically far more with the Chinese than with the United States. So this is the bigger, I think, the geopolitical consequence. If this drags on, I would still say that this is just the, it's the preliminary stages of this fearful potential slippery slope.
This overhaul of the healthcare system, which has been proposed by President Obama, we understand was first proposed in the year 2009 during his first term in office, and of course it was a key issue in his last presidential campaign also. We also witnessed the bitter parliamentary fight that we saw in the year 2010 in the Congress. The Republicans opposed vehemently to this particular law. What do you think is the way forward now? As Mr. Sheth said, this is clearly a legacy issue for President Obama.
Yeah, I think one of the proposed exit formulas is that the administration will agree to raising some kind of taxes on medical instruments, which is not really a substantial issue, but it can be a concession. And in return, possibly the Tea Party segment will say that, we won the war and we made the point. And then they will let the rest of the Republican Party vote for ending the shutdown. I think the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, is in a particularly, tricky situation because he has to hold on to his position. And I think privately he may be even amenable to a compromise. But the grassroots, as they call it, the radical conservatives are the ones who are telling him that, our constituents, local people, especially in the South and the Midwest of the United States, which is more conservative, tends to be more racist. They are totally behind us. And people are saying that we did the best thing. There are some even cynically going to the point of saying, we anyway didn't need so much government. And we shut it down, so it's a good thing. And people are realizing that we can manage even without so many government services. So I think, and this, if you trace it back historically, it goes all the way to the American Civil War. A lot of the states tend to distrust the federal government and want to carry on with their own policies, which initially included promoting slavery. So until now, you have this strain in the body politic. And for it to be healed, I think it's impossible. I think, especially because Obama is black, there are a lot of pent-up, hidden reasons why this has been so intransigent, the Tea Party. But practically speaking, they've never defaulted. And I think Wall Street is going to come down like a ton of bricks on Republican funding
Right.
if this goes on. So actually, I think we're going to see that we will not reach the debt default for sure.
Okay.
But what will happen is, brinkmanship until the last moment to extract some kind of concessions that the Republicans can take home to their gerrymandered constituencies and to show, look, we fought a war and we stood down this enemy of free markets and and capitalism, as they paint Obama. So I think that's where, so we will see, I think they will emerge out of it. The only thing is that, is this going to be, and because every 6 months or every 1 year,
Right.
we're going to keep coming back to this appropriation, to budgets, to state spending.
Right.
And this is going to be like a permanent Damocles sword as long as there's a Democratic presidency. So, and the Republicans are nowhere close to capturing the White House even in 2016. So what we are now looking at is, a prolonged stalemates with episodes like this,
Okay.
which can undermine American credibility in the long run.
What about the economic implications? You said that it could be resolved much before that. What can we expect in the days to come?
I think the economic impact is going to be substantial because the markets, they operate on the basis of confidence, or what Keynes used to famously call the animal spirits. So people are going to watch how close to the precipice they're going to get, and the markets are going to read signals into this. As of now, U.S. Treasury bills still are considered to be the safest haven for investors. But what this does is, it sows doubts in the minds of private market actors as to, should we be operating in a country where possibly even, the securities regulators can shut down one day. Imagine a situation where there's, trillions of dollars being traded in equity markets, capital markets, with, the 4 or 5 main government regulators, all incapable or understaffed. So if you reach the situation where the Securities Exchange Commission, Commodity Futures Trading Commission, all these key economic regulators, possibly even the Fed, if they run out, I mean, just imagine, already the labor statistics on the basis of which they calculate the employment data has been late. And the entire market takes the cues from the labor statistics. What is the unemployment? Is it 7.3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, right? Hiring decisions. So therefore, that's what I was saying, the link between the sovereign debt and the corporate debt and, the interconnections are so deep, especially in an advanced capitalist economy. The state is not entirely, separate from the private sector, right? They're intermeshed in many ways through all these Fannie Mae and Freddie. There are all these entities through which the state and the corporates move together or sync together. So therefore, I think they need to think. The Republican Party, which claims to work on behalf of American businesses, is really hacking at its own feet, politically as well as for the economy. And I think this is clear. They have been trying to kind of justify their acts, but it's mostly mutual backslapping among their own circles. It's not being appreciated by the markets. And investors are pretty fickle. If the same investors who fled the emerging economies and went to the safe haven now come back in the opposite direction because America looks dysfunctional, they're going to pay a huge price for it. So I think that's why the president is, I think, I agree with the president that, this is thoughtless and reckless on the part of the Republican Party to hold up the economic recovery. And remember, America's strength always, they say, is in business and promoting businesses. If that model seems to be shaky, then what are they going to project globally as the ideal way of organizing your economy and society? So even at the level of doctrine and at the level of proselytization, which the Americans do across the world, saying open your markets, give businesses confidence, protect intellectual property rights, if all those key functions within the US economy themselves are being underperformed, then they will lose the right to preach. So this is what the rest of the world is most worried about, that the very model of American capitalism is under threat from this divided government, which can be divided, as I said before, but should not be paralyzed like this, and which gives the sense that there is no national will.
What could be the economic fallout for the US, because it comes at a time when global recovery is already shaky? Implications for American businesses wanting to come to India?
I think the deficit hawks have really ruined America's chances of a rebound. And if you learn the lessons from the 1930s from Great Depression, Roosevelt did not have this kind of Congress to handle, and the New Deal really pulled them out of trouble. And this time around, I think they have held the whole nation hostage. And I think, in the long run, as you see, I don't agree with the formulation of America as a superpower. I think it's just one of 4 or 5 great powers. And great powers are not global in their hegemonic reach. They only have limited impact in certain regions. And increasingly, they will have to ration their resources if this goes on, where, the deficit hawks are saying, let's be isolationist. The Tea Party doesn't even want a strong universal foreign policy where global presence and outreach also. So all this isolationism at home and the conservative backlash against the role of the state, both at home and overseas, is going to eventually reduce the United States footprint in the world and reduce it to one of among maybe 4 or 5 great powers, which is good for us because we prefer a multipolar world.
I'd like to thank all my guests for coming to the studios. It was a pleasure having you all here.